So people have often criticized me for using the lowly drywall screws to hold a lot of things together, especially when I built my shed, so I thought I'd do a test comparing drywall screws against a few other types of screws to see how they hold up. So the screws are all about 2.5 inches long. This is a number 7 drywall screw, a number 8 wood screw, and 2 deck screws. The difference is this one has this self-countersinking head and this one doesn't. So what I want to test is how hard these screws can pull. So I'm going to put the screw in this piece of wood. I've pre-drilled some holes in there, and I'm going to screw it into here and clamp it against here. And I've got this all equal distances here, so this here is my fulcrum, and this is 1/3 the distance as it is to here. So whatever force this screw pulls, it's going to exert 1/3 of that force onto my bathroom scale. So my scale reads in pounds, and I'm going to start the screw just with an impact driver, and I want to see what the maximum holding is. So now that it's started, I'm going to finish it with a regular screwdriver just so I can control this more carefully. So right now we're at 40 pounds, so that means we're pulling at 120 pounds right here. And let's start tightening this up some more. $60. Now we're at 70. Let's give it some more. And you can see the head is sinking in. That is always the problem with these screws, is it's not how well the thread holds, it's that the head starts sinking into the wood. 75, but it's yielding. So I think we should only count that as a 70, and let's give it one more twist. Appears to settle at about 75 pounds. So this drywall screw gives me 75 pounds here, so 3 times that right here would be 225 pounds. So it's pulling 225 pounds, and it's limited by the head here. Alright, next comes the regular 2.5 inch number 8 wood screw, and I'm going to use a new hole for this one. Okay, so now let's finish it up with a screwdriver. 60. Still at 60. 60. Maybe 65 here, but we're already sinking way into the wood here. It appears to have settled at about 70. And now for the deck screw without the self-countersinking head. So the maximum I can get this screw to hold at is 75. And now the deck screw with the countersinking head. Wow, that screw turns easy. And it really sinks into the wood, and the best I can get here is 60 pounds. And I think the problem is this countersinking head just keeps digging into the wood. And it seems to have settled down at 60 now, so I'll count that as 60. Now you need to really repeat experiments to be certain of anything, so I put the drywall screw in here again, and the scale is settled at 90, so the second test with the drywall screw is at 90 pounds. So I've just drilled another series of holes in here, so now I can flip my test piece and do this again, because it's important to repeat this and to do it with the same piece of wood, because the spruce really varies a lot. So after a whole bunch of repetitions and averaging the results, the drywall is averaging at 82 pounds, the number 8 at 73, the deck at 75, and the self-tapping at only 69. So none of my screws actually pulled out on the thread, and I think what gives the drywall screw a slight advantage is the shape of the head, which is much flatter, because this sort of shape is a bit more like a wedge, so it drives much more easily into the wood. This deck screw did particularly poorly because it has these little ridges on here which help cut a countersink, which of course give the head much less support, and it also has a bit of a different angle. So it's all in the shape of the head, and the drywall screw has a slight advantage on here. But you can't even be sure if these results are necessarily statistically significant, because I found quite a variation recording the values on the piece of wood. So the readings on this side of the piece of wood averaged 80 pounds, and the readings on that side averaged 69 pounds. And I tried to vary where I put the screws in so that I would remove this bias, but the piece of wood itself certainly has quite a variation because the growth rings are further apart on here than on here. So you have a much more of this harder summer growth material here than you do here, and that made more of a difference than the screw heads. So if anything, the drywall screws are actually a slightly better wood screw, and if you want things to really clamp together, don't use the self-countersinking deck screws. So there's also the question of how brittle are these screws, so I'm just going to clamp these screws in my vise one at a time and bend them over to see when they break. So that one just broke right where it is at the vise. Next, this one. About the same. And deck screw. That one is doing quite well. And another deck screw. So I broke a few more screws. The drywall screws all snapped. One of the regular number 8 wood screws actually was about to break when it went to 90 degrees and I hit the vise. But the deck screws did actually quite well in this regard. Both of those bent to 90 degrees without being near cracking. A more common way for these screws to fail though is just for the heads to pop off of them. So I've got two screws here, a drywall screw and a wood screw, and even though the drywall screw actually has a bigger head, it's only a number 6 screw, and this is a number 8 screw with a smaller head. So let's turn both of these just straight into the wood and see what happens. And even though this is a really hard piece of ash wood, that screw just went in and sunk below the surface. Next, the drywall screw. And this screw has just torn apart. So that number 7 screw with a big head in the hardwood, it just tore right apart. But if you're working with softwoods and you're worried about splitting it, a small screw with a big head can be a big advantage. But either way, I've had regular number 8 wood screws and drywall screws that have the heads pop off of them. And it really depends on the application which screw is best.